The stars of the galaxy shone like scattered diamonds across the void, and the human vessel Odyssey drifted quietly among them, carrying Captain Elias Ward to a world he had only read about in briefings. Arendor was said to be one of the oldest royal civilizations in the Galactic Council, a planet of towering crystal cities, golden spires, and skies filled with drifting light. Elias had been chosen not as a soldier this time, but as Earth's first ambassador to the royal court. To him, it felt heavier than all the missions he had ever flown. One wrong word could shatter the fragile respect humanity had finally earned after decades of struggle to join the interstellar community. When the shuttle landed on Arendor's surface, Elias stepped out onto pale marble platforms that stretched endlessly above the clouds. He was met by courtiers dressed in flowing garments that shimmered like liquid starlight. Their eyes, larger than human eyes and glowing faintly with inner light, studied him with curiosity and skepticism. Some offered polite bows, but he noticed the restraint in their movements, as though they were careful not to lower themselves too much before a man from a young, small world like Earth. It was during the welcoming ceremony that he first saw Princess Lyra. She stood at the center of the grand hall, a figure of grace in robes of silver and blue, her hair like a crown of living crystal that caught every beam of light. Though surrounded by nobles and guards, she carried herself with an ease that made her seem untouched by the heavy traditions around her. Her eyes, deep violet with flecks of gold, scanned the hall until they rested on him. For a heartbeat, Elias felt something strange, a warmth, a recognition he could not explain. As he bowed in the human fashion, their gazes met again. She smiled faintly, not out of courtesy, but as if she found something amusing about the way he stood so stiffly in his uniform. It was a small smile, but it stayed in Elias's mind long after the ceremony ended. Over the weeks that followed, Elias attended endless councils, banquets, and formal debates. His role was to speak on behalf of Earth, to argue that humanity had the right to shape its own future, rather than be guided like children by older civilizations. Most of the Arendorian nobles listened with distant interest, their expressions unreadable. But Lyra listened differently. Whenever Elias spoke, she tilted her head slightly as though weighing every word. And sometimes, when the hall grew noisy with arguments between alien delegates, she would glance at him across the chamber and share a quick, conspiratorial look, as if the two of them were the only ones awake in a room full of dreamers. One evening, after a long council session, Elias was invited to walk the palace gardens. He found himself wandering among towering blossoms that glowed faintly in the dark, petals the size of sails drifting down like glowing feathers. To his surprise, Princess Lyra walked beside him, her guards at a respectful distance. "You speak with conviction," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm tone of one who is used to being heard. "Most who come here try to flatter or to beg." "You argue," Elias smiled awkwardly. "I don't know how to beg, Your Highness, and I was never good at flattering. On Earth, we usually just say what we mean. Do you?" she asked, glancing at him with a spark of interest. "Do you always say what you mean?" "Most of the time," he admitted. "But sometimes we keep things to ourselves because saying them out loud feels too dangerous." Her expression grew thoughtful at that, but she said nothing more. They walked in silence, listening to the hum of glowing insects and the soft rustle of night flowers. For Elias, that silence felt more comfortable than any conversation he had endured in the council chamber. In the weeks that followed, their paths crossed more often. They spoke of small things at first: music, stories, the strange differences between their worlds. Lyra laughed when he described how humans used to dream of traveling to their own moon, how proud they were when they managed to set foot on a barren rock. To her people, spaceflight was ancient history, but she did not mock him. Instead, she said, "It must have felt like touching the sky for the first time. That is something even my people cannot remember anymore." That night, Elias returned to his chambers, unable to sleep. He found himself thinking not of the council debates, not of the future of Earth, but of the way Lyra's eyes softened when she listened to him. He told himself it was foolish. She was a princess, a symbol of a civilization older and greater than his own. To imagine anything more than friendship was impossible. Still, the thought refused to leave him. The friendship between them grew in small, unspoken ways. Once, during a storm over the crystal seas, she invited him to watch from a balcony high above the waves. Lightning arced through the air like golden rivers, and he admitted that on Earth storms were sometimes feared but also admired. She replied, "On Arendor we forget to admire. We only measure and predict. Perhaps it is good to remember fear and wonder." There were other moments, quiet meals shared after council sessions, chance encounters in gardens, the exchange of small gifts. She gave him a crystal feather from the wing of a native bird, shimmering with pale fire. He gave her a small earthstone, unremarkable in appearance, but from a mountain he had once climbed as a boy. "It's worthless," he told her, embarrassed. She only smiled and said, "Then it is perfect." As days turned into months, Elias realized he dreaded the thought of leaving. Earth had sent him to represent their people, not to fall in love with a princess from another world. Yet every time he looked at her, he felt the weight of his duty clash with the quiet truth of his heart. The breaking point came during the Festival of Lights, the grandest celebration on Arendor. Lanterns of pure energy floated into the night sky, carrying wishes whispered by those who released them. Nobles gathered in the central plaza, dressed in shimmering robes, their faces glowing in the light of thousands of drifting lanterns. Elias stood among them, awkward in his formal uniform, watching as Lyra released her lantern with a graceful motion. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment it felt as though the entire festival had faded away, leaving only the two of them in the vast glow of the sky. Elias's chest tightened and he whispered under his breath so quietly that he thought no one could possibly hear, "I wish I could marry her." The words slipped out like a secret carried by the wind. He almost cursed himself for saying them, ashamed of such a foolish thought. But as the lanterns rose higher, he noticed something. Lyra had turned. She looked at him, her violet eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. For a heartbeat he thought he had been too loud, that she had heard the words he never meant to speak aloud. But then she smiled, soft and knowing, before turning back to the lights. Elias's heart pounded as though he had just leapt from the highest peak. Did she truly hear him? Or had it only been his imagination? He could not tell. But in that single glance, in that single smile, he felt a spark of something that might change everything. He told himself it was impossible. He told himself it was madness. But as the festival lights drifted into the sky carrying 1,000 wishes, he knew his own had already taken flight. The following days after the Festival of Lights were filled with whispers in the royal halls. Elias noticed how courtiers would pause when he entered, lowering their voices as though his presence was a storm cloud crossing their gatherings. He had grown used to being treated with suspicion in the Galactic Council, but here on Arendor the suspicion felt sharper, more personal. He suspected that his growing closeness with Princess Lyra had become the talk of the palace. Lyra did not avoid him. If anything, she seemed less concerned than before about being seen together. She continued to seek him out in gardens, in quiet libraries carved into crystal walls, and during walks across bridges suspended high over the glowing seas. Yet Elias could not shake the feeling that invisible eyes followed them, weighing every step, every word, every shared smile. One afternoon he was summoned to stand before the High Council of Arendor. The council chamber was vast, built from living crystal that shimmered faintly with the voices of those who spoke inside. 12 figures sat in tall thrones arranged in a circle, their robes heavy with embroidered stars, their faces lined with the calm pride of those who had ruled for centuries. Elias bowed respectfully, but he knew this was no simple meeting. A tall counselor with eyes like frozen glass spoke first. "Captain Ward of Earth, your service has been noted and your dedication to representing your people has been sufficient. Yet troubling rumors have reached us." Another, whose voice carried the weight of thunder, leaned forward. "It is said that you seek more than friendship with our princess. It is said that you would dare dream of binding your short-lived human fate to the eternal bloodline of Arendor." Elias froze. His heart thudded painfully, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Your honors, I have never spoken of such matters in public. I have come here only to serve as ambassador. My loyalty to Earth remains my first duty." The first counselor's gaze sharpened. "And yet the princess walks with you in the gardens. She shares her time, her laughter, her trust. Tell us, Captain, do humans see friendship as others do? Or is every kindness turned into longing?" Elias wanted to protest, but he saw the trap. Any denial would sound weak. Any defense would sound like confession. He bowed his head slightly. "Humans do long. We are guilty of that. But we also honor those we care for. If the princess trusts me, I will not betray that trust. The chamber filled with murmurs. Some of the counselors frowned, others whispered to each other, and Elias felt the heavy tide of judgment pressing against him. Finally, the eldest among them, a woman with silver skin that gleamed like moonlight, lifted her hand. Enough, Captain Ward is not on trial yet. But hear this, human. The royal line of Arendor does not mix with outsiders. Not with traitors, not with mercenaries, and not with the children of a world that has only just risen to the stars. Restrain your heart, or you will be restrained by law. Elias bowed again, though fire burned in his chest. He left the chamber with heavy steps, feeling the eyes of the guards follow him until he reached the safety of the outer halls. That night, he stood on the balcony of his quarters, looking out at the glowing seas. His mind was full of doubt. What was he doing here? He was an ambassador, nothing more. To let his heart stray toward a princess of Arendor was reckless. He told himself it had to end, that he should step back, that he should protect both her and himself from the storm gathering around them. He thought he was alone until he heard the soft sound of footsteps. Lyra appeared beside him, her robe trailing lightly across the marble. She leaned on the railing, her eyes fixed on the stars above. "You faced the council today," she said quietly. "They tried to frighten you." Elias exhaled slowly. "They succeeded." Lyra smiled faintly, though there was sadness in her eyes. "They have lived so long that fear feels like wisdom to them. They think if they forbid change, the world will stay as it is forever. But forever is an illusion even for us." He turned to her, struggling to find the right words. "Lyra, your people are right. You are a princess. You carry their future. I am only a man from a young world that still struggles to find its place. Whatever I feel, it is dangerous. I don't want to bring you harm." She looked at him then, her violet eyes searching his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she reached out, her hand brushing his gently. The touch was light, but Elias felt it through every part of him. "I heard you," she whispered. His breath caught. You heard me?" "At the festival," she said. "When you released your lantern. You thought no one could hear, but I did. I heard every word. I wish I could marry her." Elias's face burned. He turned away, ashamed. "It was a mistake. I should never have said it aloud. I didn't mean to." "Do not lie to me, Elias," she interrupted softly. "You meant it, and it touched me more than all the fine words I have heard in my life. No one has ever spoken of me so simply, so honestly, not as a princess, not as a duty, but as a person." He faced her again, his heart hammering. "And what does that mean to you?" For the first time, she did not smile. She looked serious, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It means my answer is yes." The world seemed to stop. The night air stilled. The glowing sea below seemed to hold its breath, and Elias felt as though the stars themselves had turned to listen. "Yes?" he repeated, barely able to believe the word. "Yes," Lyra said again. "Yes to the question you whispered to the stars. Yes to what your heart asked when your lips could not. If you asked me to be yours, I would answer yes." Elias could not move. He wanted to speak, to say everything that rose in his chest, but no words came. All he could do was take her hand, hold it firmly, and let the truth of her words sink into him. For a long moment they stood together on the balcony, silent except for the faint hum of the night. But beyond the peace of that moment, Elias knew storms would come. The council would never accept this easily. The nobles would fight it. Perhaps the entire galaxy would laugh at the thought of a human wedding an alien princess. Yet none of it mattered in that instant. She had said yes. Later, when Elias returned to his chamber, he found himself unable to sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of carved crystal, hearing her voice again and again in his mind. "My answer is yes." It was impossible, and yet it was real. The next morning, he discovered how quickly secrets could spread in a palace filled with whispers. Servants glanced at him with widened eyes. Guards who once stood cold and silent now looked at him with open disapproval. Courtiers bowed stiffly, their expressions sharp with judgment. Somewhere, somehow, someone had learned of his closeness to Lyra. By midday, the rumors had reached the council. He was summoned once again, this time not with polite formality but with urgent command. When he entered the chamber, the councilors' faces were dark with anger. "You dishonor the crown," one of them said sharply. "You tempt the princess with human foolishness. You risk scandal that could shake this empire." Another shouted, "We will not allow it. A union between human and Arendorian is forbidden. It is against the oldest laws of our people. Elias stood silently, letting their voices rise around him like waves. He knew that anything he said would only fuel their fury. At last the eldest counselor raised her hand again and silenced the hall. "There is one path," she said coldly. "If the princess insists on this madness, then let the human prove himself. Let him face the trial of worth as ancient law demands. If he survives, then the gods themselves will have spoken. If he fails, the matter will end forever." The chamber trembled with agreement. Elias's stomach tightened, but he did not bow his head this time. He looked directly at them and spoke clearly. "If that is the only way, then I will face your trial. Whatever it demands." The counselors seemed satisfied. Some even smiled cruelly as though they had already seen his doom. But Elias stood firm, even as fear coiled inside him. When he left the chamber, Lyra was waiting. She touched his arm gently. Her eyes filled with both worry and pride. "They will not make it easy," she warned. "I don't need it to be easy," Elias replied, his voice steady. "I only need it to be possible," and in his heart he knew why. She had said yes. That one word was worth any trial the galaxy could throw at him. The morning sun glimmered across the crystal towers of Arendor, casting long shadows over the palace courtyard where Elias was to face the trial of worth. He stood at the edge of the plaza, his human uniform stark against the flowing robes of the Arendorian officials. The entire court, including Lyra, was gathered to witness the beginning of the ancient ritual. Courtiers whispered nervously to one another. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward with curiosity. The trial had not been attempted by a human before, and many were eager to see how it would unfold. Elias's heart beat fast, but he stood tall. He had faced countless dangers in space missions, but nothing had prepared him for this. The combination of political scrutiny, physical danger, and the weight of proving himself worthy of a princess. Yet when Lyra met his eyes from her place in the crowd, he felt a steady calm settle within him. Her presence reminded him why he was here, and he would not fail her. The first challenge was one of mental acuity. Arendorians prized intelligence and wisdom above all, and the council had devised a series of intricate puzzles designed to test problem-solving, strategy, and memory. Elias was led to a chamber filled with floating holographic patterns that shifted continuously. The counselor in charge explained, "Arrange the patterns in harmony with the principles of Arendorian logic. Only one alignment is correct. Fail, and you cannot proceed." He took a deep breath and studied the floating shapes. Unlike Arendorians, who were trained from birth to perceive patterns in multiple dimensions, humans relied on intuition, trial, and error. Elias focused on the simplest approach. He broke down each pattern into smaller components, observing which shapes repeated, which angles mirrored each other, and how light reflected through each figure. Slowly, he manipulated the patterns one by one. Time seemed to stretch, each movement deliberate and tense. He remembered the long nights on Earth when he and his crew had solved navigational problems under impossible odds. That patience, that methodical thinking carried him now. After what felt like hours, the final piece of the pattern clicked into place, and the holograms aligned perfectly. A soft hum filled the chamber and a hidden door slid open. Elias exhaled, feeling a spark of pride. He had passed the first trial, not with superhuman intellect, but with steady observation and human persistence. The next trial tested physical endurance. He was led to an open arena where energy fields and shifting platforms created a complex obstacle course. Arendorians leapt gracefully from one platform to another, their bodies almost weightless, their reflexes unnerving. Elias could feel the crowd's eyes on him. They expected him to fail. He stepped forward and felt the first energy field pulse. Pain shot through his muscles as he navigated the platforms. But he remembered Earth's training protocols for astronauts. Maintain balance, keep your center of gravity, and never let fear control your movements. He focused on each step, timing jumps with careful precision, using momentum instead of strength where possible. When one of the platforms began to shift unexpectedly, Elias adapted quickly, gripping a rail, swinging across, and landing on solid ground with the council murmuring in surprise. By the time he reached the final platform, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed through using sheer will and determination. When he touched the final marker, the arena lights glowed, signaling his success. Cheers erupted from the human observers who had traveled with him, and even some Arendorian citizens watching from the terraces began to whisper admiration. Elias had proven that humans could endure, even in ways alien beings considered impossible. The third trial was more subtle, yet far more dangerous. It was a test of morality and decision-making. He was placed in a chamber filled with holographic representations of Arendorian citizens. The council explained, "You may choose whom to save in a time of crisis. Every decision has consequence. Your heart, your judgment, and your empathy will be judged here." Elias looked around at the figures. Some were elders, some children, some citizens of note, and others unknown to him. The chamber simulated a disaster scenario, a collapsing building, shifting energy storms, and spreading fires. He had seconds to make choices. Unlike the counselors, who might have analyzed probability and chosen based on logic alone, Elias relied on instinct and compassion. He first directed attention to those who could not escape on their own, the children and elders. Then he guided groups toward safer exits, improvising solutions where the simulation created impossible odds. He worked tirelessly, his mind and heart working together, making choices that might not have been perfect but were honest. When the simulation ended, the holograms vanished, and the chamber remained silent. The counselors studied him, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the eldest spoke. "You have chosen not only wisely, but with the heart of one who values life above power. That is rare, even among our own." Elias bowed slightly, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. This was the trial that mattered most, for it tested not strength or skill, but the human quality that many Arendorians had underestimated: empathy. The final trial was a test of courage and ingenuity. He was brought to a cavernous chamber where the floor had disappeared into swirling mist. Floating platforms appeared, unstable and shifting, and beyond them lay a series of mechanical guardians, automatons designed to test combat, strategy, and ingenuity. Humans were smaller, slower, and weaker than the Arendorian defenders, but Elias did not hesitate. He studied the patterns of the guardians, noting that they moved in predictable loops. Using speed, timing, and clever misdirection, he avoided their attacks, leapt across platforms, and used environmental features to his advantage. At one point, he created a makeshift lever to disable a guardian, a maneuver that a stronger being might have overlooked. Each move required focus and daring. Each mistake could cost him dearly. Lyra watched from above, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her expression tense yet proud. She had seen other suitors fail before, brilliant Arendorians who had underestimated their own limits. But Elias, the human from a small young world, moved with a combination of wit, courage, and determination that no one could ignore. Finally, he reached the end of the chamber, placing his hand on a crystal pedestal that signaled the trial's conclusion. A soft hum filled the air, echoing through the vast hall, and the mist dissipated. The council remained silent, but this time there were no murmurs of doubt. Elias had completed every challenge. When he turned, he saw Lyra rushing toward him, her face glowing with relief and pride. "You did it," she said softly, her voice trembling. You survived." He smiled, exhausted but elated. "We did it," he corrected. "I could not have done any of it without knowing you believed I could." The counselors looked on, some frowning, others surprised. The trial had proven something undeniable. Elias Ward was no ordinary human. His ingenuity, courage, and heart had carried him through challenges that Arendorians themselves had deemed impossible. Slowly, murmurs of admiration spread among the spectators. Even some counselors exchanged cautious glances, acknowledging that perhaps they had underestimated humanity. Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The trials had won him a place in the eyes of the council, but he also knew that the path to acceptance would be long and fraught with obstacles. Yet he did not fear. For the first time in his life, he felt a strength beyond his own, the knowledge that someone he loved, someone extraordinary, believed in him completely. Lyra took his hand, holding it tightly as they walked together toward the palace gates. "No matter what comes next," she said, "we face it together." Elias nodded. "Always. I will face anything if it is with you." And as they stepped into the light of the glowing city, the citizens of Arendor watched not a foreign ambassador, but a man who had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not power or wealth, but courage, persistence, and the capacity to care. The news of Elias's success in the trial of worth spread across Arendor like wildfire. The citizens whispered in astonishment, nobles scowled in disapproval, and the council muttered behind closed doors, trying to maintain control over a situation that had clearly slipped from their grasp. Elias, however, remained calm. He had passed every challenge the Arendorian Council had set, and now nothing could erase the proof of his courage and wisdom. Yet victory was never simple. A faction of nobles, proud of tradition and fearful of change, began to plot behind the ornate doors of the palace. To them, a human suitor was unacceptable. They whispered of scandal, of shame, of the possibility that Arendor's bloodline might be diluted. Some proposed exile, others suggested extreme measures. Their words were quiet, careful, but their intentions were dangerous. Elias sensed the tension as he walked through the palace halls. The once formal greetings of courtiers were now cautious, even hostile. Eyes followed him, some filled with curiosity, some with suspicion. He moved carefully, aware that danger could take any form, not a direct attack but a subtle trap designed to discredit him, to make him appear unworthy. Lyra, for her part, never faltered. She walked beside him with quiet dignity, her hand brushing against his when no one was watching, her eyes shining with determination. "They think fear can control us," she said one evening as they walked through the crystal gardens, their reflections shimmering in the pools below. "But we have proven ourselves already. Let them try to stop us." Elias smiled faintly. "I am ready for anything. But what if their plans go beyond words?" "They will not succeed," Lyra said firmly. "Not if we stand together." The first act of the conspiracy came quickly. A minor explosion rocked one of the palace corridors while Elias was walking alone. Alarms blared and the guards rushed to contain the danger. Elias had managed to escape unharmed, though a piece of scorched crystal landed inches from his feet. He realized that the threat was no longer theoretical. His life was at risk, and the nobles who opposed him had no intention of hiding it. Lyra appeared almost instantly at his side, her expression a mix of anger and concern. "You must stay close to me now," she instructed, her voice calm but firm. "They cannot succeed if we do not give them the opportunity." Together they began to move through the palace under tighter security. Guards walked at their sides, their hands on the hilts of energy blades, eyes scanning every shadow. Despite the danger, Elias felt a strange exhilaration. He had survived missions on Earth that pushed him to the limits of human endurance. But this, navigating political treachery in a world not his own, was a challenge that tested not only his skills but his very understanding of trust and loyalty. Days passed with constant vigilance. Courtiers whispered, shadows moved suspiciously, and every meeting with the council seemed designed to unsettle him. Yet Elias remained steadfast. He knew that any sign of fear would only embolden his enemies. At night, he and Lyra would walk through the palace gardens, the glowing flora casting soft light across their path, and she would tell him stories of her childhood, of the lessons she had learned in leadership, of the hope she carried for her people. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the city, a new threat emerged. A masked figure attacked them during a private garden walk, moving with speed and precision. Elias reacted immediately, drawing his weapon and defending both himself and Lyra. The figure was skilled, but Elias had learned to adapt, to anticipate movements, to use the environment to his advantage. He disarmed the intruder with careful strikes, but not before a brief scuffle left both of them on the ground, breathing heavily. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes, then laughed softly, a sound of relief rather than amusement. "You never cease to surprise me," she said. "Even under attack, you remain unshaken." Elias chuckled, brushing dirt from his uniform. "Humans survive by thinking, not by brute strength. I suppose it works in other worlds, too." The attack confirmed his fears. Some among the Arendorian nobility would stop at nothing. But it also strengthened his resolve. He realized that the council's approval was meaningless if the people themselves believed in his worth. He began speaking more openly to the citizens, offering counsel, sharing ideas about cooperation, and demonstrating the qualities that had allowed humanity to rise among the stars: creativity, compassion, and courage. The citizens began to notice. Whispers of admiration turned to quiet support. They saw a human who faced impossible trials and survived, who treated their princess with respect and loyalty, who acted with integrity even when surrounded by danger. Slowly, sentiment shifted. Where once Elias had been an outsider, he was now a symbol of hope, a living example that humans could match even the oldest civilizations in heart and skill. Despite the growing support, the council and their conspirators continued to act. Another attempt was made to corner Elias during a ceremonial parade. Armed guards blocked their path, but Elias and Lyra, anticipating the threat, had prepared a different route. They moved through secret passages, led by Lyra's knowledge of the palace, and emerged into a quiet courtyard where no one expected them. The conspirators' plan failed, and Elias realized that trust, planning, and the ability to adapt were as crucial as courage in survival. Through all of this, his bond with Lyra deepened. They shared moments of quiet understanding, long conversations under the stars, discussions about duty and freedom, and the comfort of shared laughter after narrowly escaping danger. She began to reveal her thoughts about the future, not just for herself but for her people. Elias listened, offering perspectives from his own world, sharing how humanity had learned to overcome obstacles through cooperation and ingenuity. Their connection was no longer simply friendship or admiration. It had become a partnership, forged in trials, strengthened by danger, and sustained by mutual respect and love. One day the council demanded an audience. They were visibly frustrated by Elias's survival, by the growing support of the citizens, and by Lyra's unwavering stance beside him. The eldest counselor spoke first. "Captain Ward, you have survived our tests, yet you persist. You inspire those who should obey tradition. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Elias met her gaze steadily. "I understand that tradition has value, but I also understand that courage, honesty, and compassion have value too. I have proven my worth through the trials, and I have proven my loyalty through my actions. I will not apologize for either." Lyra stepped forward, her voice clear and commanding. "He has earned the right to stand beside me, not because he is human, not because he is an outsider, but because he has shown qualities that this world cannot ignore. I choose him and he chooses me. That is all that should matter." There was silence. The council members exchanged tense glances. Some of the younger nobles looked unsure, while the elders scowled, realizing that their attempts to control the outcome were slipping away. Elias felt a surge of pride, not in himself alone, but in the partnership he shared with Lyra, and in the quiet strength of the people who had begun to support them. That evening, Elias and Lyra returned to the palace gardens. They walked side by side, the glowing flowers reflecting in their eyes, the city lights casting long, serene shadows. Elias looked at her, his heart full. "No matter what happens next," he said softly, "I will face it with you." Lyra smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "And I with you. Together we are stronger than fear, stronger than the past, and stronger than those who would seek to divide us." They paused on a bridge that overlooked the luminous city, and for a moment the dangers of the palace and the council felt distant. Elias thought of the trials he had faced, the challenges yet to come, and the future he hoped to share with Lyra. He realized that strength was not just about surviving tests or evading danger. True strength came from trust, from courage, and from standing together in the face of impossible odds. In that quiet moment, with the glow of the city and the stars above, Elias understood that this was only the beginning. Greater challenges awaited, but he also knew that with Lyra by his side they could face anything. And in the hearts of the people, whispers of admiration for the human ambassador grew louder, carrying hope that a union between their princess and a human might not be impossible after all. As the night deepened and the twin moons reflected on the crystalline towers, Elias felt a certainty he had never known before. Love, loyalty, and courage could overcome even the strongest opposition. And together he and Lyra would prove it to the world. The council chamber of Arendor was filled with a tense silence. Every noble, every elder, and every advisor sat in their high-backed seats, watching the center of the grand hall where Elias and Lyra stood together. The ceiling arched high above them, carved with crystal patterns that caught the light of the twin suns pouring through. It should have been beautiful, but the air was heavy with suspicion and conflict. This was the moment the council had been waiting for. They had tried to stop Elias in every possible way. They had forced him through trials, sent whispers to turn the people against him, even arranged attempts on his life. Yet he stood unbroken, his posture straight, his eyes calm, his presence a silent challenge to their fear of change. Princess Lyra stepped forward first, her voice steady and strong. "Honored counselors," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "You asked for proof. You demanded that Captain Elias Ward show his worth. He has faced every trial you created, trials that even the bravest of our people would hesitate to face. He did not falter. He did not surrender. And he stands before you today not as a conqueror, but as a man who chose love, honor, and respect." Her words carried weight, but the counselors remained still. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others whispered among themselves. Finally, the eldest counselor, a woman with silver markings on her brow, spoke in a sharp tone. "Tradition is not so easily cast aside, Princess," she said. "We have followed the same laws for centuries. Arendor must be protected from reckless choices. A human cannot rule beside you. What you ask is not simply a marriage, it is a rewriting of who we are." Elias stepped forward then. He had been quiet, allowing Lyra to speak first, but now his voice carried across the chamber. "With respect, your laws were written to preserve strength and honor. I do not seek to erase your traditions. I seek to honor them. I have faced every test with respect for your ways. I did not come to take your throne nor to command your people. I came because I love Lyra, and I am willing to give everything to stand by her side." The words hung in the air. He had not spoken with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, only with sincerity. That honesty struck deeper than any argument of politics. Still, not all were convinced. One noble rose suddenly, his eyes flashing. "You are a danger, human. Your survival was luck, not strength. And your words are meant to charm, not to lead. We will not allow you to weaken Arendor." He reached for his ceremonial blade, intending to challenge Elias then and there. Gasps filled the chamber. The guards moved, but Lyra raised her hand sharply. "Enough!" she commanded. "No more blood, no more trials. If you cannot accept Elias by his deeds, then you must accept him by the will of the people." That was when the doors of the council chamber opened. Dozens of citizens entered, led by members of the guard who had grown sympathetic to Elias. They were not rioting, nor shouting. They stood calmly, their presence alone a statement. Men, women, and children of Arendor looked at the counselors with steady eyes. One elder among them, her hands trembling with age, stepped forward. "We have watched the human," she said softly. "We have seen his courage, his kindness, and his devotion to the princess. He has treated us not as strangers, but as equals. We believe he is worthy." The chamber erupted with murmurs. The counselors looked shaken. For centuries, their word had been law, their voices absolute. But now the people themselves had spoken, and their support for Elias could not be ignored. The eldest counselor closed her eyes, as though weighing a great burden. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "If the people accept him, if the princess accepts him, then we must reconsider. But know this, Captain Ward. If you fail her, if you fail Arendor, your punishment will be beyond measure." Elias nodded firmly. "I understand, and I accept." The council could resist no longer. By ancient custom, when the will of the people aligned with the will of the princess, no decree could stand against it. The counselors bowed their heads one by one, conceding defeat. The tension broke like a wave. The citizens cheered softly, and Lyra let out a breath she had been holding. She turned to Elias, her eyes shining with emotion. In that moment, surrounded by nobles, guards, and her people, she reached for his hand. "You spoke once in a whisper," she said softly, her voice carrying enough for those nearby to hear. "Now speak it again with courage." Elias smiled, remembering the moment when it had all begun. The quiet words, the simple wish. He looked into her eyes and said clearly, "I wish I could marry you." Lyra's lips curved into a radiant smile. "My answer is yes." The chamber erupted in cheers. The people's voices rose like a song, echoing through the crystalline halls. For the first time, Elias felt not like an outsider, but like a part of something larger, something brighter. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The palace transformed into a place of celebration, with glowing lanterns strung between the towers and music drifting through the air. The people of Arendor embraced the coming union, their skepticism replaced by excitement. They decorated the streets with banners that shimmered in the light, blending the symbols of Earth and Arendor together as one. Elias found himself overwhelmed at times. He had lived through battles, through dangers that tested his body and mind, but this This acceptance, this joy, was unlike anything he had ever known. The citizens greeted him with respect, not as a foreigner, but as one of their own. Children asked him questions about Earth, their wide eyes filled with wonder. Elders offered him blessings, speaking of new beginnings. Through it all, Lyra remained his anchor. She guided him through customs he did not yet understand, explained rituals that seemed strange to him, and always reassured him with a gentle touch or a shared smile. Their bond, forged in trials and strengthened in trust, now bloomed fully into love. On the day of the wedding, the entire city gathered in the grand square before the palace. The sky above was painted with the colors of dawn, the twin suns rising together in a rare alignment that happened only once every century. The citizens took it as a sign, a blessing for the union. Elias stood at the center, dressed in ceremonial garments crafted by Arendorian artisans, but adorned with symbols of Earth as well. The blend of cultures was striking, a true symbol of what this marriage represented. Lyra entered soon after, her gown shimmering like starlight, her presence commanding and graceful. The crowd fell silent as she walked toward him, her every step filled with purpose. When they stood together, the elder priest raised his voice. Today, we witness not just the joining of two souls, but the joining of two worlds. Let their bond be proof that love knows no boundary, that strength lies not in walls, but in bridges. Elias and Lyra exchanged vows, simple but true. Elias promised to protect her, to honor her, to share every joy and burden. Lyra promised to walk beside him, to trust him, to lead with him as one. When they sealed their vows with a kiss, the square erupted in celebration. Music filled the air, dancers twirled in the streets, and the people rejoiced. It was more than a wedding. It was a declaration that unity was possible, that differences could be overcome by courage and love. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued, Elias and Lyra stood together on a balcony overlooking the glowing city. The air was filled with laughter and song, the light of lanterns reflecting off the crystal towers. Elias leaned close, speaking softly so only she could hear. I never thought I would find a home beyond the stars, but now I know I have found it with you. Lyra rested her head against his shoulder. And I have found mine with you. They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the people celebrate below. The dangers, the trials, the opposition, all of it had led to this moment of peace and joy. Elias knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew they would face them together. For the first time in his life, he felt complete. Not as a soldier, not as an ambassador, but as a man who had found love and purpose among the stars. And as the twin moons rose over Arendor, casting their gentle light across the city, Elias whispered once more, this time not in doubt, but in certainty, I wish I could marry her. And beside him, Lyra's smile was the promise that his wish had come true.